Hey guys, so it's officially spooky season and I decided what better time than now to launch my very first YouTube channel. So every Wednesday I am going to be sitting down and discussing one true crime unsolved mystery with you, and we are going to discuss in the comments what we think possibly happened. If you have any theories that I didn't bring up in the channel, always let me know down below. I'm really excited to start this channel, so before further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's story. We are talking about the disappearance and murder of Dorothy Jane Scott. Now, Dorothy was a single mother. She was 32 years old, and she was living in a home with her aunt and her 4-year-old son. The father was not in the picture. They had gotten divorced, and he had moved to Missouri, states away, and was nowhere near them. In order to keep themselves afloat, Dorothy actually was working 2 jobs. It was a conjoined business in Anaheim, California, one of which had actually previously been owned by her father, Jacob. She worked as a back secretary for these 2 businesses, and when she was working or when she was doing something where she couldn't watch her son, Sean, Vera and Jacob, her parents, would babysit him. Early 1980, Dorothy began getting phone calls in the home that she shared with her aunt and her son, and also at her business. An unidentified man began calling her regularly, and the content of what he was calling about would constantly change. His mood constantly changed, and it would range from him being in love with Dorothy, wanting to spend the rest of his life with her, just being completely obsessed with her and wanting her all to himself, to him being bitterly angry and saying he was going to murder her, he was going to kill her, he was going to find her alone and take her. And he even went as far as to tell her that he had begun stalking her. And he was verifying that he was stalking her by giving her information that nobody else could have known, places she had gone throughout the day, people she had talked to, clothes she had been wearing. He knew everything about her life at this point. So obviously, Dorothy became a little freaked out, very paranoid. She told her family. It's unclear if she went to the police with a stalking report as of that point in time. There were some people online that said that she had gone to the police, but there are other people that said she had not, and people were telling her to go to the police, but she had never actually gone. One time the caller had even told her to go outside because he had left a present for her. Now, this was ballsy on her part. There is no way I would have gone outside if somebody who said he was going to kill me had told me to go outside. She decided to go outside and check it out, and she found a single dead rose on her windshield. That's creepy. There was also one call in particular that shook Dorothy to her core, in which the guy claimed that one day he was going to get her alone, he was going to kidnap her, and he was going to cut her into tiny bits so that no one would ever find her. At one point, Dorothy said that she could kind of recognize this man's voice, but she could not pinpoint where she had heard it. She just knew that she knew this man from somewhere, but she could never point the finger and say, this is exactly who is calling me. So in May of 1980, after a while of getting these phone calls, she ended up deciding to take some action, and she enrolled in karate classes to learn self-defense, and she began discussing with family members and friends the possibility of her purchasing a firearm for protection. On May 28th, a little bit over a week after Dorothy began starting her karate lessons, she had a meeting at work where she noticed one of her coworkers, Conrad Bostron, I'm sure I'm butchering that last name, I apologize. He was looking just deathly ill. He looked very sick, he did not look well, and she noticed that he had a rash on one of his forearms. She got concerned, so by the end of the meeting, she decided she was going to drive Conrad to the hospital just to make sure that everything was okay. One of her other coworkers, Pam Head, decided she was going to go as well. So they loaded him up into Dorothy's car together and headed off to the hospital. They made a quick stop first at Dorothy's parents' house so that she could explain where she was going to be, asked them if it was okay if they could watch Sean for a little bit longer, and she also changed from a black scarf to a red scarf. Now that is significant later in the story, so keep that in mind. She changed black scarf to red scarf in this time. So they get to UC Irvine Medical Center. Go Anteaters. At 11 p.m., Conrad was released from the hospital, and they had informed them that it was a black widow spider bite. He had gotten some medication while at the hospital, and they had given him a prescription to fill for him to continue taking medications to control the symptoms. At this point, Dorothy decides to run to the restroom real quick, and she was separated from them for not very long, and then she decided, because she was just a great human being, she didn't want Conrad having to walk all the way to the car in the parking lot. So she decided to tell them they should go fill the prescription at the hospital pharmacy, get that done out of the way so they don't have to make any pit stops on the way home, and she was going to go out to her car and pull it around to wait for them out front. It only took them about 5 minutes to get the medication from the pharmacy, and they go out front of the hospital, and Dorothy has not pulled her car around yet. And they are a little bit concerned, but they figure she's just, taking a bit of time. So they wait for a couple of minutes and decide they were gonna walk to the spot that the car had been parked, just to check, see if she was just waiting in the spot or anything. As they begin to walk, they see Dorothy's car with its highlights on, and it's late, so with her highlights being on, they could not see into the car at all. And the car is barreling straight for Pam and Conrad. So they get out of the way, and the car just blasts past them, takes a hard right out of the parking lot, and turns off their lights completely, and just goes down the road and disappears into the night. Now, Pam and Conrad figure that maybe Dorothy had gotten a call. There was a family emergency involving Sean, and she had to get there quickly, so she didn't have time to tell them. So they decide to wait at the hospital for her to return. A couple of hours had gone by, and they start getting a little bit concerned, as anybody would. Now, keep in mind, this is 1980, so there's obviously no cell phones, no way to reach anybody. They couldn't just text somebody, be like, what's going on? That wasn't a thing. Pam goes back into the hospital and ends up calling Dorothy's parents to ask what's going on, where is Dorothy? And her parents inform her that Dorothy has had no contact with them. There was no family emergency. They don't know where Dorothy is. That obviously throws everybody into a panic, and they immediately call the police. At 5 a.m., Dorothy's car is found in a back alley only about 10 minutes from the hospital, and it is ablaze, completely engulfed in flames. Obviously, firemen are called, and they begin trying to put out the fire, and people are afraid that maybe Dorothy was still in the car. But when the flames are put out, there are no human remains in the car. Not in the trunk, not in the driver's seat, nowhere. There are no human remains here. Nobody was in the car when it was set on fire. They begin looking in the immediate area, and they can't find signs of anybody. Rescue groups scattered the entire area, and they were unable to find her. Now, exactly a week later, on Wednesday, because she disappeared on a Wednesday, Dorothy's mother, Vera, gets a call at her residence, and it is a man claiming to be the stalker, and he simply says, "I've got her," and hangs up the phone. Dorothy's mother, Vera, calls the police, and the police tell them, "Do not go to the media. We need to find her." I don't know. I've done a lot of research on cases where someone has gone missing, and I know that police don't like the media to get involved, because if the case gets sensationalized, there's a chance that the kidnapper will get cold feet and kill and dispose of the body, and that's something that the police are trying to avoid. So they're telling Vera and Jacob, do not go to the media, let us do our jobs. But a week after that, Jacob says enough, and he goes to the local newspaper, the Santa Ana Register, and puts out an ad asking for any information that could lead to their daughter, being found, whether dead or alive. They also put out a reward of $2,500 for any information. Right after the story breaks in the media, the editorial manager for the Santa Ana Register, named Pat Riley, gets a phone call, and this man is claiming to be the one who took her, and he says, quote, "I killed her. I killed Dorothy Scott. She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having someone else. I killed her." He went on to relay more intimate details that only the kidnapper could have known. He knew that the reason Conrad had been at the hospital was for a black widow bite, and he also said Dorothy had been wearing a red scarf at the time that he took her. Those details were not published in the paper. They were only known by the police. They had not been published anywhere. So it was very credible that this man was the kidnapper. He also stated during this phone call that Dorothy had called him from the hospital just hours before she disappeared. And the police say that this was absolutely not true. Pam Head, who was the coworker of Dorothy that was there at the hospital, said that they had never been separated the entire time they were waiting for Conrad to be released. The only time that she had gone off on her own was to go to the restroom right before they left and to go to her car. Now, again, this was before cell phones. She couldn't have just gone into the restroom and made a quick phone call to him. She didn't even know who the stalker was. How could she have called him? It just wasn't a thing. It wasn't possible. It was a lie that he had made up. So clearly, he had become so obsessed to the point where he had gotten delusional. There was something going on. Some kind of wires were crossed. Either he was outright lying or he was completely delusional about their relationship. Dorothy's mother would continue to get phone calls every single Wednesday for 4 years. Sometimes he would say, "I've got her, I have her." Other days he would say, "I killed her." He was just messing with Vera's mind at this point. Because of these phone calls, the police did attempt to trace the calls, but they were so short. They were just the little snippets like, "I killed her," hang up, or "I have her," and he would hang up. They were just not traceable, especially with the technology at that time. I'm sure nowadays you could probably trace it, even though it's just a short phone call, you could probably figure it out. But back then, there was nothing that they could do. They did record the voice of the man, but that never led to anything either. One day, Dorothy's father, Jacob, had had enough. The stalker was only calling when Jacob was out of the house. So one Wednesday, he decided he was going to stay behind and he was going to take the phone call. So the stalker calls, Jacob picks up, and the stalker immediately hung up without a word. And the phone calls ceased after that. So that to me is very sketch. That means he clearly knew Jacob might recognize his voice, and he was not willing to take that chance, and he was done. He knew that if he continued to harass them, the risk of getting caught was too high because Jacob knows him, in my opinion. After the phone call stopped in 1984, that same year in August, only a few months after the phone calls had stopped, a construction worker working on Santa Ana Canyon Road, say that 3 times fast, holy cow, that was only 13 miles away from UC Irvine Medical Center, discovered a dog skeleton had been buried. So he goes to remove the dog skeleton, and underneath he finds human remains. The police are called, and they're able to confirm that it is Dorothy Scott's remains based on dental records and things that she had been wearing. And when she had been buried, she was wearing a turquoise ring, the red scarf, and she was wearing a watch. The watch had stopped at 12:30 a.m. May 29th, 1980. Unfortunately, just over an hour after she had been taken initially. Unfortunately, they were not able to determine the cause of death because the body was too decomposed at that moment. They did figure that whoever buried her there had put the dog skeleton, the dead dog, on top of her, because if cadaver dogs had picked that up, if they had dug and they found the dog skeletons, they might just cover it back up and move along and not find Dorothy Scott. And unfortunately, it was a construction worker, so he had to clear out the entire area, and he did discover the bones. Unfortunately, on April 23rd, 1994, which would have been Dorothy's birthday, her father Jacob passed away at the age of 69. And only 8 years later, Vera followed. Dorothy's son, Sean, still tries to pursue justice for his mother to this day. He was only 4 at the time of her disappearance, and he is hungry for answers. He even launched his own investigations, and he has his own files on everything that had gone on, and he is actively searching for his mother's killer. Though there's only a couple of theories on who could have done this, unfortunately there was no concrete evidence at all ever found for this case. They didn't find DNA. I don't even think DNA was a thing yet. In 1980, it might have been in its like rudimentary forms, but nothing enough to possibly catch the killer. And at that point, the body was so decomposed, they probably wouldn't have found anything on it anyway. I do wonder if they still have the car and if they could possibly get DNA from that car or fingerprints or something, but it sounds like the car was too damaged in the fire. Clearly, her stalker had developed some unhealthy obsession with Dorothy, and he must have just been very mentally ill and decided that they were together and that they loved each other. There is a theory that he saw Dorothy, or heard that Dorothy had taken Conrad to the hospital, and maybe he got twisted in his mind that he thought Dorothy and Conrad were dating or together. But to the family's knowledge, Dorothy was not dating anybody. But the killer might have seen her with Conrad that night and just snapped and decided now was the time. I also think that the stalker realized she started taking karate classes. He may have known that she was discussing with people that she was going to purchase a firearm, and he saw his window of opportunity closing right before his eyes, and he knew that he had to act fast if he was going to do anything. So one of the people that the police initially wanted to investigate was her ex-husband and Sean's father. In cases like this, you usually want to look at husbands, family members, exes, anything like that, obviously, but this man was living in Missouri. He had an airtight alibi, and people point out that Dorothy most likely would have recognized his voice on the phone. She was married to him at one point. They did have a 4-year-old child together, so I don't understand. You know, most people say she would have recognized it. And also Vera most likely would have recognized it as well. He wouldn't have been scared off by Jacob only. You think Dorothy would have recognized the voice better than Jacob. So he was ruled out as a suspect. There was another suspect possibility. His name was Michael Butler. He went by Mike, and he was the brother of one of Dorothy's co-workers at these businesses. Due to his sister working there, he would have had intimate details about her work schedule. There also is the possibility that after the meeting, his sister went home and just on and off comment, oh yeah, Conrad looked really sick, so Dorothy decided to take him to the hospital, and that could have clicked it, and that's why he went to the hospital in the first place. Everyone is innocent until proven guilty, by the way. There is no concrete evidence saying that this man did this horrible crime and the stalking. Obviously, I don't think he should be brought to justice or anything like that, but I do wish that there was some kind of concrete evidence that could have tied somebody to this case. This also explains why Dorothy could have recognized this man's voice but not been able to pinpoint it, because as a co-worker's brother, she may have been introduced at one point. He may have come into the store at some point and talked to her very briefly. That could have been where the infatuation started. That also explains why he would not have talked to Jacob, because Jacob used to be the owner of one of those businesses, and he may have recognized Michael's voice on the phone, and he wasn't going to take that chance. Now, during Sean's investigation, Dorothy's son, into these crimes, he did try and contact Michael's sister for further comment and just for clarification on some police records, but she completely avoided him, denied talking to him, would not come to him and speak with him at all. Now, before jumping to conclusions, I can see how that sounds really bad, but at the same time, if my brother had been accused of killing somebody or doing some horrible crime, and we had been investigated and I had talked to police and fully cooperated, and he was never brought in. There was no evidence linking him to the crime. That and the possibility of people talk in towns, and people may have suspected him and decided maybe he got ostracized from the town. Maybe their family just had a hard time after this, people believing that Michael had possibly done it. And I can see why she wouldn't want to dredge that up years later. I mean, it had been years by the time Sean was old enough to even conduct this investigation. So to bring up something from like 20 years ago that you had already laid to rest, I can see why she wouldn't have done it, but it does seem a little sketch. So unfortunately, that is the entire case of Dorothy Jane Scott. They obviously never found who did it. They don't have any leads, and her son Sean still seeks answers to this day. I hope that that was at least interesting to hear about. If anyone is interested in true crime, I've always loved true crime. I'm a true crime junkie, so that's why I decided to do a true crime series. Every Wednesday I'm going to be sitting down with a new true crime story. I already have next week's lined up. Just to get you a little interested, give you a little taste, it involves a 17-year-old girl, a family dog, and a possible police cover-up, which is a good one. It is a good one. So I hope for my first video it wasn't too bad. I also am going to have a video uploading on Saturday, hopefully if everything goes as planned. Saturdays are going to be called Supernatural Saturdays, where I talk about anything paranormal, unexplained events, ghost stories, haunted places, anything like that. That stuff has always interested me, and it really fits the mood for October. So I hope that sounds good, and I hope you tune in to my future videos. Bye!